Hello. Today I will try to show that the principle of relativity does not work. The principle of relativity states, all systems of reference are equivalent with respect to the formulation of the fundamental laws of physics. That is, physical laws are the same in all reference frames, inertial or non-inertial. Good example of this principle would be that astronaut in spaceship should not be able to understand if he moves in absolute frame of reference or not. First time this principle was formulated by the Galileo Galilei in 1632. Almost 400 years ago. Then it was formulated for Newtonian mechanics as Galilean transformation. After that it was reformulated by Henri Poincaré and Albert Einstein for electrodynamics and was used to derive the Lorentz transformations. In general relativity, local principle of relativity was used by Albert Einstein. We can safely say that it's an example of physics principle that was never disproved, only expanded. Nevertheless, it might be wrong. And to show that we don't even have to fly to some distant galaxy. Please note that I'm not going to fight with Lorentz transformations. In my other video I've shown how we can derive Lorentz transformations without any principles of relativity, but by making assumption that the speed of matter is constant in absolute frame of reference, that internal motion and absolute motion are mutually exclusive events, and that tick frequency of clocks depends on the amount of internal motion. Link to that video is in the upper right corner now. So I don't have anything to say about Lorentz transformations. But Lorentz transformations do not include all laws of nature. They might work for time, they might work for speed, probably they work for electrodynamics, all of that will have to be checked. But those are not all nature. There are also heat, temperature. I should mention that in another video I've described the so-called axis of evil and explained how that axis is connected with absolute movement of our planet in absolute space per my theory. In that video I also told that there are physical effects that we can see on our planet that show our absolute movement. Link to that video is in the upper right corner now. According to it, our planet and all solar system move in absolute frame of reference perpendicular to the plane of the solar system. And the direction of that movement is from northern hemisphere of Earth to southern hemisphere as it's shown on the screen. So today I will demonstrate some of those effects. In one of my previous videos I described the idea that the momentary speed of all matter could be constant in absolute frame of reference. Link to that video is in the upper right corner now. When I was investigating the consequences of that idea, I made a hypothesis that when we increase the amount of internal motion of a physical body, that could slow down the absolute movement speed of the physical body in absolute frame of reference. The more you move internally, the less you move absolutely. At the same time, in physics they often say that as temperature of a physical body increases, its internal kinetic energy, internal motion increases. So I thought that maybe that internal motion increase could somehow lead to slow down effects for heated physical bodies, and maybe we can see those effects on our planet. So this is the hypothesis to be checked: heated objects slow down in absolute frame of reference. It would mean that heated matter should be affected by force that makes it slow down in an absolute frame of reference, and it should look for us as if it moves in the direction opposite to the direction of absolute movement of Earth. In other words, heated physical bodies should move to the north. I've investigated available public sources of information and have found some evidences. 1. Temperature. Northern hemisphere of Earth appears to be up to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than southern hemisphere on average. Someone could think that it's because northern hemisphere gets more sunlight throughout the year, but that's not true. Earth is actually nearer to sun when it's summer in southern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere gets more sunlight on average, but still is colder. 2. Tropical cyclones. This map shows the tracks of all tropical cyclones which formed worldwide from 1985 to 2005, taken from Wikipedia. It's obvious that there are much more tropical cyclones above the equator. The source for tropical cyclones is warm water. The only explanation for so many cyclones above the equator is that there is more warm water there. And the hypothesis we've made earlier explains that. 3. Equatorial counter-current. This current flows west to east at about 3 to 10 degrees north in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, between the north equatorial current and the south equatorial current. I don't see any reason why that current should be between 3 to 10 degrees north and not between 3 degrees south 3 degrees north, if hemispheres are equal to each other. But if there is additional effect that makes heated water on equator move to the north, that would explain it. 4. Currents. It is a well-known fact that warm currents in northern hemisphere are more powerful than warm currents in southern hemisphere, both in Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. There is nothing comparable to Gulf Stream or Kuroshio in southern hemisphere. 5. Tidal waves. Classical explanation of tidal waves is that they are caused by the moon or sun gravity. Moon or sun attracts water and as a result water bulges are created and they move from east to west. So everything we should see is a bulge over equator or tropics. But instead we see this. Taken from Wikipedia. We see really strange patterns that have not much common with what we would expect to see and what is described in classical tidal waves theories. Everything becomes much cleaner if we add the effect described earlier in this video. I will be discussing only what happens in the northern hemisphere, as the southern hemisphere would be some kind of continuation or reflection of what happens in the northern hemisphere per my assumption. Argument for that is that whatever happens in southern hemisphere is not even consistent and differs from ocean to ocean. Northern hemisphere on the other hand is consistent. Besides attracting water, sun and moon send photons to it. These photons slow down the water in absolute frame of reference and we get two effects. One effect makes bulge move along equator while the second effect makes water move to the north, perpendicularly to the axis of evil. As a result we get the strange patterns we see. Those are a result of mixing of the two described effects. Regarding the so-called amphidromic points, the points where tidal waves amplitudes are zero, per my assumption different maximums and minimums just cancel each other in those points. So we can describe the amphidromic point as a standing wave. Even though we don't see a bulge at amphidromic points, water still moves to the north, perpendicularly to the axis of evil. As a result of such movement we see that the highest tidal waves in northern hemisphere are not anywhere near the equator as they should be if they were caused purely by gravity, but in locations like the Bay of Fundy, Canada. Ungava Bay, Canada, the Cook Inlet, Alaska, the Sea of Okhotsk, Russia. Why I speak about north and not northwest direction? Because Earth rotates and corresponding direction in specific location of Earth changes during the day. So that's my explanation for tidal waves. To be more sure some kind of simulation should be launched, but that's not a kind of job that one person without funding can do. I'm sure that other effects can be found, for example different water levels near the northern and southern poles, but I think that's enough so far. All these effects do exist and require explanation. I provided one. Do you know any other? Anyway, any theory can not just explain observations, it should also provide predictions that could be tested in experiment. So here is the prediction. In the northern hemisphere heated physical body should slow down its absolute speed in absolute frame of reference and we will observe that as if its weight temporarily decreased. In the southern hemisphere heated physical body should slow down its absolute speed in absolute frame of reference and we will observe that as if its weight temporarily increased. We could also describe this effect as additional force that together with Coriolis force affects heated objects. The effect could be tiny, but I hope it is observable. Of course when I say northern hemisphere, I don't mean somewhere near the equator. I mean somewhere near the northern or southern pole. Please note that the direction of hypothetical force should be perpendicular to the axis of evil and plane of solar system. As Earth rotates, that direction changes during the day. If experiment is launched and if it confirms the predictions, it would mean that relativity is officially disproved. And we would prove that some laws of nature depend on the direction in space. Also if that's true, the same way astronaut in spaceship somewhere deep in space can understand in which direction he moves in absolute space using heat. So that's it. Relativity is possibly disproved. After almost 400 years of being wrong, we finally have a chance to understand the nature. Because if you can find out your absolute movement direction even in deep space, it's opposite to what the principle of relativity states. We've got a major scientific breakthrough. Hooray! Thank you for your attention.